Jack Dragna was born Ignacio Dragna in April of 1891 in the aptly named Corleone, Sicily, in the Italian city of Palermo.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. So do you think Michael Corleone is related to?
No, Michael Corleone is from Godfather, Italy. He was born to Francesco Paola and Anna Dragna. I don't know why he took his mom's last name, but maybe I never found out if his dad was in the picture or not. Probably not. Just to give you some historicals, between 1876 and 1914, about 14 million people, which is about a third of Italy's population, left the old country for the United States for a myriad of reasons.
14 million?
That's what I read that and I'm like, that can't be, but I don't know.
That's a lot of paisans.
A lot of the reasons were like earthquake weather related, but also like the economy was so bad at the time. They're like, well, no, this won't be a thing anymore. And a lot of them...
They were afraid of Vesuvius.
So the Dragnas were part of this whole group. Anna, his mother, immigrated to America via the SS Alsatia in 1898, bringing with her Ignacio, his older sister Giuseppa, and their older brother Gaetano. Once here, they stayed in Brooklyn with a family headed by Antonio Risotto.
Risotto? Is it risotto?
I think
it's not offensive to say risotto if his last name is Risotto.
It's Risotto, and Antonio Risotto, which was her cousin's family, who's also from Corleone and was a family. You can't see me doing air quotes, but family. I'm not quite sure, but like 10 years later, the Dragnas returned to Sicily, where Ignacio joined. First, he joined the Italian army, and then second, he joined the Sicilian mafia. Not like
which is a department. It's an arm of the Italian army.
Once you raise the ranks, you're legitimately in the
they've
mafia.
They've got the Navy, the Army, the Marines, and the Mafia, and the Air Mafia.
Land, sea, air, and deli. After all this, they returned to America in like the 1910s, and after serving the mafia in Sicily, when he came back to New York, Ignacio fell in with Gaetano Riana, who was a lieutenant who was close to a powerful gang boss, Giuseppe Joe the Boss Masseria. Excuse me for not knowing how to pronounce Italian names off the cuff. Eventually, Masseria led his own crime family in Manhattan and the Bronx. So Dragna was now a player in the New York Italian mafia, and the Giuseppe is either Masseria or Morello. I read both when I was doing my research, so I kind of just switched it in my writing. Apparently, Ignacio was now going by the name Charles Dragna. In New York in 1914, a murder would lead to the exposure of the Italian crime syndicate. Chicken magnate and poultry dealer Barnett Baff was murdered by an outfit that represented the quote-unquote poultry trust in New York.
Is this part of the Breaking Bad universe?
Yeah. You weren't aware that was all true?
Los Paisanos Hermanos? Or no, I guess the Pollo. No.
Is this a thing that happens in Breaking Bad?
There's a chicken guy.
Oh,
he runs it. He basically runs like Church's Chicken, but he's like the biggest gang lord in Mexico.
Well, this is pretty simple. Well, this guy is just...
This is just like that.
Just like that. This is just like a regular poultry dealer.
I say wink, wink. We're winking now.
We're winking now.
We're going to be winking for most of this episode.
We'll try to make it audible when we wink. So Barnett Baff was just like a poultry dealer, and the gangsters, this poultry trust in New York would extort $10 per truckload of poultry from merchants. Barnett Baff resisted this extortion, and because of this, he was gunned down in public. Others say that he was gunned down because in 1911, he actually tried to expose the poultry trust, but either way, he wasn't going to be talking anymore. Barnett Baff's murder would lead to an investigation of how organized crime worked in New York. Many claim that the hit was carried out by Dragna and Ben Risotto, and wouldn't you know it, but in 1914, Risotto and Dragna fled to sunny Los Angeles for whatever reason, just casually.
Poultry trust risotto sounds like a great combination to me.
Sounds like a great meal. So they come to Los Angeles, and then Ignacio's brother Gaetano soon followed and was now going by the very American name Tom. Gaetano is now Tom. Ignacio is now Charles. So let's talk a little bit about the Italian organized crime in LA around this time. Here's something I didn't know and didn't have enough time to detail, but the dreaded and spooky Black Hand criminal organization had I don't know if it had an LA chapter or if a group calling and acting as if they were the Black Hand was here, like a copycat sort of thing. I think that actually happened a lot.
They had like a kiosk.
Yeah, they had a satellite
in the airport.
They had a remote warehouse. Yeah, the Black Hand were notorious at kidnapping, extortion, arson, and murder as a means of getting money. Black Hand kind of dies out during Prohibition when bootleggers become big time crime kings. But between 1890 to 1920, many would-be mafia members would start off by committing these Black Hander crimes. It seems like there was an original Black Hand, but once they became notorious, it became more of like an idea, like a sort of Batman thing, where if you want to extort money from a fruit vendor, let's say, you write a threatening letter and you cite it the Black Hand, and then everyone flips out. And because there's no registry or no central operating group for the Black Hand, they can get away with calling themselves Black Hand, and suddenly the Black Hand is in Los Angeles. So whether they were actually actually in LA or not, we're not really known.
Fruit vendors are a superstitious and fearful bunch. Obviously, the mafia is objectively bad,
right?
But there's so many times where like they're so romanticized, it's so interesting, and then when you really get into the details of it, it's like, oh, they were extorting and manipulating like the poorest people out of the little money they had, and that was like their bread. Sure, they extorted the highest people too, but they were squeezing people who had nothing for everything they had,
and couldn't literally not defend themselves against them. And
great guys.
Great guys. A little kid who's poor growing up sees the mafia knock over a fruit vendor and take all his money, and they're like, cool. And at no point sympathize with the fruit vendor. They're like, oh, he's a loser because he got knocked over by a really big guy with power.
Ever since I was a little kid, I wanted to be a fruit vendor.
I'd watch that movie.
Fruit fellas.
Along with these okay, so Jack Dragna was one of these criminals that would be recorded practicing Black Hand crimes when he came to LA.
And Jack Dragna is the son.
Sorry.
Or Charles Dragna.
All the same guy. Ignacio is his real name. He starts going by Charles, and then when he gets to LA a little bit later, it's going to be a big reveal. Jack Dragna.
Oh.
All the same guy.
So the Holy Trinity.
Like the Holy Trinity. His brother changed his name to Tom, a more American name. He changed his name to Jack, which is more American.
Okay. Yeah, I thought it was, that's very confusing. Because I know it's like the Dragnas were like a family.
Yeah.
But I didn't know it was just two brothers.
They would refer to the Dragna family, but it didn't seem like anyone above him in his family. His dad wasn't in the picture at all. He was like the oldest. Well, his brother Tom was, but Jack was, I think,
it's
a little
like
more of
the Black Hand. If you tell enough people you have a family, they'll all fear that you have a family.
And then like his cousin's family was a mafia family, the Risottos. So like I'm sure when you say the Dragnas, you're also talking about the Risottos and everything.
It's a family in the mob sense.
Yes, thank you. Yeah. So along with these Black Hand crimes, there were also more traditional Italian-run crime families, according to MafiaHistory.us. The early Sicilian American underworld that dominated Southern California in the late 19th century was an extension and expansion of a mafia out of New Orleans, which had some sort of relation to the mafia of Southern Colorado, which I did not look into at all.
I didn't even because the New Orleans mafia shows up very briefly.
They're a jazz band. They're a great jazz band.
The way that they could play when the Saints come marching in.
When the feds come marching in.
Yeah, they briefly show up in mine, and I was like, there was a mafia in Louisiana? Like that innocent town of Louisiana?
The other LA? The other crime city?
The LA that doesn't have dots in between the two letters?
It seems like after, like, Italians would get to New York, and then they would try to branch out, and then they ended up in Louisiana, New Orleans, because I guess of all the gambling that was happening down there.
That makes sense.
And it's also, I think, it was like a port, like a big port city, right? I have no idea how this works.
The landlocked city of Louisiana.
If you're not scared of alligators, it's you can get in there.
Landigators.
Also involved with Black Hand was Dragna's mentor, another man from Corleone named Salvatore Strivo, or as he went by later, Sam Striva, who arrived in Los Angeles in 1901 after basically being exiled from Italy. On the surface, Strivo was a barber with his own shop in San Pedro and later ran a baking company on 11th Street, also in San Pedro. But on the down low was extorting money all through San Pedro and Wilmington, as well as running a blind pig, which just means an illegal winery, which is a...
Wait a minute. Didn't we talk about that recently?
We did.
A blind pig?
Yeah, the gambling episode was
that phrase. I haven't. That's a phrase I haven't heard since.
And I just walk away.
That's a phrase I haven't heard since the Disney Plus series.
Blind pig. He was running an illegal winery, which is funny. For a speakeasy to be like a wine bar is very funny to me. And
the feds bust in and it's like Frasier. Heavens, which is another intro we did.
So this was 1915, and Strivo was the ringleader of this criminal group fighting for dominance of San Pedro ports along with major crime families in LA. Like, he wasn't major, but the major ones were the Matrangas, the Sucias, and the Ardizonis.
These are all Italians?
These are all Italian-run families. Ardizzoni, I think I'm saying that right. I don't know if I'm saying any of these right. So Striva's kind of low on the totem pole, but he took in Dragna as like a mentee. But these are the three families dominating the LA area.
It's so weird to think about. I guess that's why it's underworld history. What would you call it? Like, I had no idea there was mafia in San Pedro.
But it makes sense because it's a port city. Yeah. I wanted to get into these three families a little bit more without like stretching my research too much. But it was literally like a family tree that wasn't extending out. So these three families are basically at war with each other. Around the turn of the century, maybe 1905, the most prominent Italian criminal organization in LA was being run by the Matranga family, who may or may not have been related to Charles Matranga in New Orleans, who ran the mafia down there. That prominence was being challenged by Joe Ardizzoni. First, he went to war with George Maisano and managed to whack him. He shot him in the back outside of the Mayor and the brewery?
Meyer and Zobel.
Meyer and Zobel. He shot him outside of Myers and Zobelin's cursed ass brewery on the Lisa
isn't
Street.
that the one where they cut down the tree?
They cut down the tree and then the tree fell on them. Yeah, that's the one.
In Meyer and Zobelin brewery, tree cuts down you.
So part of the curse maybe, but then somebody was killed right down. So in this particular beef, Joe's cousin, Joseph Susia of the Susia family, was also killed. Killing George Maisano made Joe Ardizzoni. He was the former leader of the Black Hand, I guess, and killing this George guy made him one of the major bosses in the criminal world in LA. Maisano was an ally of the Matranga family, so that puts Ardizzoni up against the Matranga family, who went to war with him in 1910. So back to Dragna. Sam Striva, along with his brother Ben Striva and Dragna, they extorted money off of a wealthy rancher, Domenico Loracella, and threatened to kill.
Is this an Italian also?
I believe it's another Italian man, yeah. They threatened to kill his family. So Loracella went to the police and they arrested the three men. Jack served time in San Quentin and was released in 1920 at the dawn of the bootlegging era. Like, he was released in the year where everybody who was a bootlegger was suddenly a criminal mastermind. He's like, okay, sure, let's do it.
Don't be tempted out there.
So by this time, the Black Hand type extortion crimes were done and the Italian mafia crime groups dishing out booze and prostitution were in. But also the major crime operation in Los Angeles for Vice was the octopus of the City Hall gang, which worked along with the police, the media, which was LA Times and Chandler, even though they fought for control of police, and the criminals. This would have to be challenged and it was going to be hard, but Jack Dragna would try, along with Johnny Rosali, who they think killed JFK. Some people speculate killed JFK, but now I know better.
There's going to be a lot of JFK speculation in this episode.
My favorite.
Speculation number one, he's coming back and he's running with Trump. He's going to be vice president. Not even RFK anymore, JFK.
Not even JFK Jr. anymore, John Fitzgerald Kennedy.
Yeah, that's who it was.
He's going to come and he's going to open his hand and a bullet's going to come out. And he's like, who's magic now? And then Trump with his little hands collapse. So along with Johnny Rosali, they would muscle out low-level gangsters like Guy McAfee and Farmer Page.
Those were two of the people I talked about in the gambling
That's right,
episode.
Guy McAfee was a former cop running gambling.
I said it was the gambling episode. Why are you questioning it?
And he was, basically breaking up their operation. They would eventually go to Vegas and just try to scramble any control that they can get. Around this time, Jack Dragna sets up the Italian Welfare League, also known as the Italian Protection League, which he partnered with Joe Ardizzoni, who's the guy who's going to war with the Matrangas. For this, Jack was the president and Joe was the treasurer. The purpose of this league on the surface was to assist Italian grape growers and vineyards of California who were suffering through restrictive prohibition laws. Like, Italians had vineyards, couldn't make money anymore, so these two guys put an organization together to try to help them.
And then extort them.
The club was noted as being like a social and political club that had strong influence on the Italian community. Many claim that this was just a front for a muscle operation, but they used the Italian Welfare League for something more sinister, but we'll get to that in a little bit later. Joe Ardizzoni was the leader, but the warring families was still a thing, and Iron Joe did a lot of things to piss people off. New Orleans gangster Vito DiGiorgio was backed by the Eastern Mafia leaders and sent to LA in hopes of unifying the crime families of LA, but DiGiorgio was killed in a pool room in Chicago, and many people think that Joe was behind this. So in 1931, the tides were changing. Joe Ardizzoni was starting to get targeted, and many suspect after the killing of Dominic DiCelio. I have no idea.
A hard C, Greg, or a soft C.
So he killed this guy, Dominic DiCelio, who was the king of the Little Italy underworld in LA's North End. He killed him. In March, Ardizzoni and his friend Jimmy Bazzali were headed home from Downey when a large sedan pulled up on them and fired. Bazzali was killed, and the attack left Ardizzoni wounded with 7 gunshots, but he managed to stagger to safety. In October, Joe left his house on Mount Gleason Avenue and started towards his cousin's house. From what is rumored, he was pulled over by another car with armed goons, and they took Joe for a ride. That was the last time anyone saw him, dead or alive. He disappeared, and after 7 years, his wife declared him legally dead. A day later, Joe's brother Frank went missing, and while Joe Ardizzoni may have had many enemies and many reasons to get killed, it said the person behind Joe's disappearance was Jack Dragna, because Jack was next in line for power, and with Joe gone, Dragna stepped in as a new boss of the Los Angeles criminal underworld in LA. Jack Dragna was now the West Coast Godfather. Under his reign, basically Lucky Luciano and Myers Lansky on the East Coast were okaying everything here, but he was now their man for LA.
The West Coast Godfather also, instead of oranges, he needs an orange Julius. That's the big, in the West Coast version of the Godfather movie, that's the big metaphor, is an orange Julius. And he puts an orange Julius cup in his mouth to entertain his grandchildren and then dies because it doesn't fit.
It just doesn't fit, and it goes right through his teeth. Somebody says no to the West Coast Godfather. They wake up. They have half a skateboard in their bed.
And there's like melted sex wax all over the bedding.
Like I was saying, he's now the West Coast Godfather, and all the families under Lucky Luciano's commission in Los Angeles would now be unified. All these warring families now were not going to be at war anymore because they put a guy in.
It gets kind of confusing to me because there was so much Jewish gangsterism in Los Angeles, and it was headquartered on the East Coast, which was a Italian Jewish union. I get mixed up of like who's Jewish, like
Yeah.
Who am I rooting for here?
Which one of you am I supposed to relate to? Everyone has Tommy guns and fedoras. Who am I supposed to relate to here?
Which one of yous look like people in old pictures of my family?
If I was going to a bar mitzvah, who party would I be at?
Am I going to a bar mitzvah or a communion?
I'm dressed for one, but not the other. So now it's 1931. Jack Dragna is now the boss of the criminal underworld in Los Angeles. And with Mayor George Cryer out of office, the City Hall gang was all but busted up. But now that prohibition was also over, bootlegging was old business. So they turned to gambling and prostitution to keep vice flowing. Dragna, along with some other associates, purchased a football field-sized fishing barge. His was the Malfalcone, which
Football field size.
That's what they said. That's what I read. The Malfalcone was football field size.
They get it from the Navy?
Yeah, they got it from the Navy, and you could only buy boats if it's the length of a sports stadium.
Yeah. I ordered a football field size boat. This is a lacrosse field size boat.
Oh, I ordered the half court. His was the Monfalcone, which we talked about in the gambling ship episode, which we learned luxury gambling ship off the coast of LA went to war with other gangster ships like the Joanna Smith and the SS Rex, and the Monfalcone was burned and sank. Also, but a big important thing about
but a boom.
A big part of these gambling ships, but I don't know if I talked about enough, was the horse betting, which was done through what was called race wiring, which, by the way, race is a verb.
Right. That was what Charles Manson was trying to start.
It was a racket that they made money from. It was just basically like bookmaking done continentally through Chicago thing. And if you use this service, this continental service through the Chicago outfit, Rosalie and Dragna made a cut from that, this race wiring thing. That was a big deal. Around this time, Jack fell in with a man named Frank Shaw, who listeners might know as one of the most corrupt mayors of LA, the only mayor to be ousted. The bombing of Clifford Clinton, Harry Raymond, that was all under Shaw's reign. Shaw was groomed for office under Jack Dragna. Shaw was his political plant and allowed Jack to get away with his crimes. Wow. Their joint racket was securing construction contracts for a fee. A company bidding for a city or a county project would be insured the job over competitors if Jack liked them, which is very similar to a guy we had recently.
I'm glad the city's not like this anymore.
So rather than bleeding these contractors greedily, he received a one-time commission for brokering a deal. He got in office with his influence over the Italian community thanks to the Italian Welfare League. So he used his sway with the Italian community to put Frank Shaw in office. I'm always a little bit intrigued by these shadow men. Jack Dragna was a shadow man for this Frank Shaw. And also, I'll get to a little bit later, but Brenda Allen too, the madam.
Right.
He was behind Brenda Allen too, which is very interesting to me.
Yeah, there's a few things in Mickey Cohen's story where it's like, oh, this was the one doing that.
Yeah.
Like, this was the reason that these bad things happened.
It's very strange because we like to point, we're like, oh, well, she's the criminal mastermind. Well, actually, she had to pay a cut to Jack Dragna. But his good times didn't last for very long because word from high above, being Meyer Lansky and Lucky Luciano, was that Dragna was not going to be their guy anymore. Mm-hmm. Their guy was going to be Bugsy Siegel, who was arriving on the West Coast later in the 30s. Dragna was certainly not happy about that, but questioning Luciano and Lansky was not an option, so he just had to go with it. And Siegel, Luciano, and Lansky basically all approved of the new gangster on the rise, Mickey Cohen. Comparatively, Dragna kept a very low profile.
My hero.
The savior of LA, Mickey Cohen. Boyle Heights' own Mickey Cohen.
Shining star.
Dragna kept a very low profile, and it seems like trying to work in the shadows was very important to him. It seems like that was a big part of the job, was not being known by anybody.
Yeah.
You'd think that a gangster would keep a low profile.
Right. Yeah, it's the black hand, not the hand that there's a flashlight shining on.
The lighted hand.
Yeah.
His predecessors, Siegel and Cohen, were the exact opposite in those respects. We'll probably get into that more, but in Los Angeles, both of them were the celebrated gangsters in town, mingling with movie stars, gracing the gossip columns, and 100% acting the part of a gangster. And in the new modern metropolis that was Los Angeles, Dragna was really looked down upon. He had barely begun to unify the crime organizations. He had struggled for years against the City Hall gang, and by 1938, his political plant, Frank Shaw, was ousted after Clifford Clinton and Civic had exposed corruption.
He's like, who is the actress the silent film actress, and then sound came and she was like, I love ya, baby. Could have been any of them.
Was it Greta Garbo?
It might have been Greta Garbo. I don't know, but whoever that is, like that's the equivalent of him or of like Nixon.
Exactly. Being televised against.
He sounds great on the radio. What does this man look like? And he's just like a melting crayon. And then there's JFK next to him. Like that's what Bugsy
wiping
Siegel.
Marilyn's lipstick off his face.
I don't know how this got here.
I fell into it. Had a lipstick
And I came out looking like the Joker. I swear I will go after this Batman.
We go after him, not because it's easy, but because it is hard. Anyways, he was kind of Dragna was kind of looked at as maybe a failure in the eyes of the higher ups because he didn't dominate the Sunset Strip, which was unincorporated territory outside of LAPD jurisdiction and could have been used for vice, could have been had a proper casino that they profited from. But Dragna slept on this, and now Siegel would have to come in late and establish that. It was now the late 30s, early 40s, and a lot of vice was moving to Los Angeles. But Cohen, Siegel, and Dragna, as we would learn, would be here to stay. While Dragna and Siegel knew the importance of working well together, they swallowed a lot of their disdain for each other. Mickey Cohen did not have that kind of control and was constantly stirring the S word.
Okay, let's not go casting aspersions against someone who's Jewish in front of me.
This is very
This
anti-Semitic.
is an anti-Semitic episode, Greg. You're veering into some sticky territory.
Cohen was
Why won't we all just stay in line, you say?
I could think of a lot of officers of a certain political party that thought the same thing.
Why won't we just be happy with what we have? You want us to stay on the Lower East Side? Greg.
In the late 30s, early 40s? You don't find that problematic?
And might I just add, ask not what Batman can do for you, but what you can do against Batman. I was looking for okay, when can I put that in there? No good time, but there it is.
Probably not. It's going to come up and you're going to be like, I used it already. So Mickey Cohen, constantly stirring S word, pissing everyone off, as you'll go into. Do you go over Maury Arloff at all?
No, I think his name came up, but he didn't fit in. He didn't fit my narrative.
He made Mickey look bad. Mickey Cohen robbed an ally of Dragna's named Maury Arloff pretty early on, and that alone set Dragna spiritually against Cohen. Not like working against him in any way, but if I ever come across. Cohen either didn't care or was unaware of how well connected Dragna was to top tier criminal bosses and was tied closely to Chicago upper crust. I imagine he didn't care at all. I imagine
Mickey
he thought,
Cohen? No.
Yeah, why would he care?
Why?
Why would he care at all?
Why would the angriest man in Los Angeles,
the most hot-headed person in Los Angeles, care?
The man with the most complexes in the mafia, why would he care what other mafia people have to say about him?
In 1942, Bugsy Siegel forced alley bookmakers to use his wire service instead of the Chicago wiretap that put money in Dragna's pocket. Siegel even sent Mickey to go to the alley office of this race wire service and bash stuff, scare them up, and ended up beating down the son-in-law of the guy who ran the Chicago wire service, which sent Mickey hiding from punishment and made Siegel have to clear things up over him.
One of many times he did something like that.
Yeah, one of 150 times. This change-up, it started something called the Wire Wars that left a dozen people dead, which I was trying to look up, but Wire Wars is a weird thing that comes up in Google.
Whenever you look for it, the Water Wars comes up.
Similarly, it was Dragna who pretty much set up the system that allowed Brenda Allen and the LAPD to run prostitution in the city and get protection, and it was Mickey Cohen who pretty swiftly and carelessly undid all of that when he used that revelation that Brenda Allen was shacking up with the LAPD sergeant as his ace in a hole during a trial. So this meticulously crafted thing that Jack Dragna put together, Cohen was just they on trial.
That's my boy. That's my guy, Greg.
So Dragna is just time after time again, what the hell? Come on. So Cohen was pissing everybody off, and Dragna, he may have looked at Bugsy Siegel as an equal, even if they didn't like each other. He saw Bugsy Siegel as at least an equal, right, but certainly looked down on Mickey Cohen, and they were not peers in his eyes, and that's reciprocal. So when Bugsy Siegel was gunned down in his Beverly Hills Bermuda Triangle home, a spot in the criminal underworld had become available. The press made a bigger deal of this rivalry, but after Siegel was killed, there were many attempts at Cohen's life, as you're probably going to get into, and it was seemingly coming from every direction, or at least could have been.
There was one direction in particular that it was coming from.
Nothing, according to history, spells out Dragna being behind these attacks, but Mickey was curious, although if he thought it was Dragna, he could have easily dealt with that, or at least that's what Mickey said. In 1950, a crime committee was formed and put a spotlight on organized crime across the county. During these, the man behind the Continental Press Wire, the one Jack Dragna was part of, he pretty much came out and said that Jack Dragna was the Al Capone of Los Angeles, putting Dragna's name in the ear of every law enforcer on the West Coast. Senator Estes Kefauver, I think his name is.
The committee thing.
The committee thing. Yeah. His people pretty much called Dragna the mafia boss of the Pacific Coast and the kingpin of Southern California bookie syndicate. And while Mickey and Bugsy would have loved this kind of attention, Jack Dragna hated it. He absolutely was I can't be a gangster anymore because everybody knows my name now.
Reverse Cheers. He was in Cheers, but not happy about it.
You'll get into where Mickey Cohen goes.
His Cheers is Senate Judiciary Committees where everybody knows
my name. Cliff is actually a high-ranking judge drinking on the job, just like Cliff was. So you'll go into where Mickey Cohen goes in 1951. I think a couple of years after the committee, I think Jack Dragna is certainly starting to slow down after all of this. success. Jack Dragna's wife Frances dies of cancer, I think in 1953, and Dragna himself was getting older and dealing with health issues, as well as now having the feds looking into him more aggressively because of the committee. Dragna was having a hard time now for several reasons running a criminal organization. The feds were trying to have him deported, and his plans to move to Las Vegas were stubbed when the authorities wouldn't even let him leave LA County. Finally, in 1956,
Suddenly he follows the law?
That's the one rule I can't break. That's the one law that
he has to be invited outside of LA County first.
Why has he been alive for so long? Finally, in 1956, Jack Dragna died of a heart attack at the Saharan Hotel in Hollywood.
Where's that?
I didn't even look into it. I saw Saharan Hotel, like, oh, he died in Vegas. That's weird. And like in Hollywood, I'm like, oh. Dragna has left a quiet legacy on the history of LA, as criminals maybe should have. His name appears throughout crime stories of Los Angeles, but he is not a personality like Cohen or Bugsy, and he's never been like represented that much as like a big bad in Hollywood gangster movies. And sometimes later in the century, they would refer to Dragna and his organization as the Mickey Mouse Mafia for their inefficiency. But Dragna was a career criminal himself, coming from the old country and pretty much establishing and taking part in how vice defined our city for like a long time.
What a guy.
He's the black hand of single LA gangsters, because like not well known and did his job under the radar this entire, like, you say Mickey Cohen, you know who he is. You say Bugsy Siegel, you know who he is. You say Jack Dragna, you have to think about it. And it's probably to his credit.
If you're a gangster, that's what you want.
Yeah, you want that.